Carrie Fisher became a symbol of strength long before the world understood the cost of carrying one. On screen, she embodied sharp intelligence and fearless defiance, a princess who spoke back and refused to wait for rescue. Off-screen, however, her life unfolded far more quietly and painfully. Fame arrived before she had the space to develop emotional armor, and expectations followed relentlessly. Carrie lived inside a contradiction that never resolved itself. Admired yet deeply self-critical, celebrated yet often isolated. Every public smile concealed an ongoing struggle with identity, self-worth, and stability. What makes her story endure is not a single dramatic moment, but the accumulation of pressures that shaped her from childhood onward. Carrie Fisher was not protected by success. She was shaped by it, strained by it, and eventually forced to confront it with honesty that few public figures ever dare to show. Growing up where privacy didn't exist. Born in 1956 in Beverly Hills, Carrie Fisher entered a world where fame was not a goal, but a permanent condition. Her mother, Debbie Reynolds, and her father, Eddie Fisher, were household names, and the public followed their lives with relentless curiosity. When her parents' marriage ended under intense media scrutiny, Carrie was still a toddler, yet the instability left a lasting imprint. She grew up moving between homes, schools, and performance schedules, rarely experiencing consistency. While surrounded by success, she learned early that attention did not equal security. Her father's absence and her mother's demanding career created an emotional gap that no spotlight could fill. Carrie learned to observe rather than trust, to adapt rather than settle. Childhood passed quickly, replaced by an early awareness that she would always be seen, even when she wanted nothing more than to disappear. The stage came before safety. Carrie's introduction to performance happened before she had time to develop a sense of emotional grounding. She appeared alongside her mother in live shows and eventually on Broadway, learning discipline under unforgiving lights. The schedule was demanding, leaving little room for schooling or normal adolescence. Performing became less about passion and more about survival. Each appearance felt like a test, not only of talent, but of worth. When she transitioned into film with her debut in Shampoo, she faced adult expectations in an adult world while still emotionally unformed. The success of the film opened doors, but it also intensified pressure to prove herself independently of her famous lineage. Carrie did not arrive in Hollywood shielded by privilege. She arrived exposed, carrying ambition, insecurity, and the growing belief that failure was not an option she could afford. Becoming Leia. Before becoming herself. The casting of Star Wars altered Carrie Fisher's life instantly and irreversibly. At 19, she was chosen not for softness but for sharpness, bringing an authority to Princess Leia that redefined female characters in science fiction. The film's success was unprecedented, transforming Carrie into a global icon overnight. But fame came with unspoken conditions. Her appearance was scrutinized, her body treated as a public asset, and her confidence steadily eroded beneath expectations she did not create. Humor became her shield, a way to reclaim power in an environment that often stripped it away. While Leia symbolized control and resilience, Carrie privately struggled with feeling trapped inside an image she could not escape. The role immortalized her, but it also froze her in time, leaving little space to grow beyond what the world wanted her to remain. Pressure, control, and silent coping. As the Star Wars franchise expanded, so did the demands placed upon Carrie. Public appearances, filming schedules, and expectations of perfection followed her relentlessly. The pressure to maintain an image began to affect how she viewed herself, creating a fractured relationship with her own body and sense of control. Coping mechanisms emerged quietly, not as rebellion, but as attempts to manage overwhelming emotional intensity. The industry rarely acknowledged vulnerability, and slowing down was never encouraged. By the time later films were released, Carrie had learned how to function under strain while concealing exhaustion. Even iconic moments that audiences celebrated often carried private discomfort for her. Success did not bring safety. It amplified scrutiny. And beneath the applause, Carrie began carrying burdens she did not yet have the language to confront openly. Love, power, and emotional imbalance. Away from the camera, Carrie navigated relationships shaped by imbalance and inexperience. During the early years of Star Wars, she became involved in a private relationship marked by unequal power and emotional intensity. At an age when identity is still forming, admiration and longing blurred into attachment. Years later, when she chose to write honestly about that period, it was not to assign blame, but to understand herself. The public reaction was harsh, reopening wounds she had barely begun to process. In contrast, her friendship with Mark Hamill provided something rare: stability without expectation. That connection endured because it did not require her to perform or shrink. These emotional experiences shaped Carrie's understanding of intimacy, reinforcing a lifelong tension between wanting connection and needing self-preservation. Writing became her lifeline. As acting opportunities narrowed, Carrie Fisher redirected her energy toward writing, where she could finally control her narrative. Postcards from the Edge marked a turning point, blending dark humor with brutal honesty. Writing allowed her to examine addiction, fame, and family without pretending they were tidy experiences. Success as an author and screenwriter followed, though often without public recognition. Behind the scenes, Carrie became known as a trusted voice who could strengthen dialogue and deepen characters. This work gave her quiet power. She no longer needed to be visible to be influential. On stage and on the page, she spoke openly about mental health and recovery, using humor as a bridge rather than a mask. Writing did not fix her struggles, but it gave them meaning. Living openly with mental illness. Carrie Fisher spoke about mental illness with rare candor at a time when silence was the norm. Diagnosed in early adulthood, she spent years learning how to coexist with a condition that resisted simplicity. Treatment was ongoing, imperfect, and deeply personal. She rejected romanticized narratives, choosing instead to describe survival as a daily practice. Her openness offered validation to countless people who saw themselves reflected in her honesty. Speaking publicly did not make her life easier, but it removed shame from the conversation. Carrie refused to present herself as cured or broken. She presented herself as human. In doing so, she expanded the language around mental health, proving that complexity could coexist with humor, intelligence, and creative brilliance. Motherhood and reclaiming balance. Becoming a mother brought Carrie a new center of gravity. Her daughter, Billy, became a grounding presence, anchoring her in responsibility and routine. While illness did not disappear, priorities shifted. Stability mattered more than spectacle. Carrie chose relationships and structures that supported honesty rather than illusion. Co-parenting required maturity and compromise, lessons she embraced without bitterness. Motherhood did not transform her into someone else. It sharpened her understanding of herself. She continued to work, write, and speak openly, but with clearer boundaries. Carrie learned that love did not require self-erasure. It required presence. That lesson, earned through years of instability, reshaped how she navigated the world during the later chapters of her life. The legacy of radical honesty. Carrie Fisher's legacy cannot be confined to a single role or era. She changed popular culture not only by portraying a fearless heroine, but by refusing to hide the realities behind fame. She normalized conversations about mental health, reclaimed imperfection as strength, and showed that survival itself is meaningful. When she returned to Star Wars later in life, she did so on her own terms, challenging outdated expectations with unapologetic truth. Her passing marked the end of a singular voice, but not its influence. Carrie Fisher remains present in the way stories are told more honestly now, in characters allowed to be complex, and in people who found courage through her words. She lived without armor, and that may be her greatest act of bravery.